Birmingham listeners, welcome back to the feature show and to our second episode in our STEM special. I'm Jawairiya Tanveer, your host for this show, which is all about showcasing and celebrating the achievements of women in STEM. In the first half of the show, we're lucky to firstly be joined by Maria Rozzini, who is the Head of Education at the British Science Association, to just really get us excited about the lead up to British Science Week. We're then going to be hearing from our lovely guest, Shireen Amjad, who is a clinical study administrator at AstraZeneca, following on from completing a degree in biomedical science at the University of Birmingham. Hi, Maria. Welcome to the feature show. Thank you for giving us your time today.
Hello.
Hi. So your role with the British Science Association is as the Head of Education, and British Science Week is just one of the many projects that the British Science Association do run and host. Tell us why it's so important to have a week dedicated to celebrating STEM.
So I think it's just a really good time to highlight and celebrate STEM at all levels, and to have a week where everybody can get involved. A time when you can just do a little bit or you can do a lot, and just shine a light on it, really. I think if you didn't have a particular week, I know lots of different schools sometimes have science weeks at different times of the year, which is great. But I think there's something really powerful about everybody joining together at the same time to do something fun.
Absolutely. And I like that you mentioned it's something that everyone can do together at the same time. And I think the timing is just quite nice because it does clash with the return of students to school. And I guess after a period of extended screen time, it is nice to have something like British Science Week to welcome the students back in. So what sort of activities can schools and the local community groups get engaged with to just really keep the students engaged? And I'm sure there were many exciting plans that had to be adjusted due to current guidelines.
Yeah, so obviously everyone's coming into a different and unique environment. So the way that different schools have managed the lockdown process, different communities have done different things. So my biggest top tip would be that do what works for you, and there will be an option for your situation. So there's loads of things that people can do. So we have a poster competition every year, and this year it's around innovating for the future. And I think coming off the back of all the lockdowns and the year that we've had, I think that's a great thing to be thinking about a better world and a future, and how we can innovate to make that future better. So I'd really encourage people, you can do that from wherever you are, in whatever setting you're in.
Brilliant.
And the other thing I'd encourage people to do is, obviously, since whilst people have been more isolated and at home, I think it's been so hard to have project work, group work, all of that kind of working together, softer skills, collaboration, problem solving. So there are a whole bunch of ideas on the British Science Week website, which have, so you can download free activity packs there. There's a secondary activity pack that's got loads of really good ideas. And there's also activity packs for early years and primary. So people who are doing stuff with families and communities, they can download stuff there as well. And then we've got our Quest Awards scheme, which we run, and that the resource library for Crest has got so many great project ideas. So one might be, we've got a really nice one called Stop the Spread, very, very topical, although we actually we brought it out a few years ago, but it just happens to be really, really topical now. And that's all about inventing a hand washing device that doesn't use too much water. So thinking about the challenges of hand washing maybe in the developing world, where you might not have as much water available, but obviously washing hands is super important if you want to stop the spread of disease. So that's a really nice one. You can work on that using stuff from the recycling, and working that in teams for that. So I would really encourage people coming back to do something that involves, where you can, problem solving, working in teams, taking on board everybody's ideas, and having fun, because that's something that's been really tricky over the last number of months. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, that sounds really great. And it's definitely a really good chance to take up all those skills, like you said, the collaborative work and just bringing up that excitement. And that sounds absolutely great. And it sounds like there's definitely something for everyone. So 100% worth checking out. So the purpose of this show and the previous show that we have done in the lead up to British Science Week was all about celebrating the successes of our local Etonians who do come from underrepresented backgrounds but have gone onto a variety of STEM fields. So one of our guests has gone on to bioengineering, which is a niche type of engineering. We've got a guest who has combined STEM with the finance and economic sector, as well as guests who took routes other than university to get into STEM careers. And I know that the British Science Association also value the importance of sharing experiences and sharing that insight into the world of STEM from those who do come from underrepresented backgrounds. Why do you think it is so important for that representation of diversity to be showcased?
I think because you can either be in a positive or a negative cycle when it comes to stereotypes. So it's harder for all of us when we're growing up. It's harder to imagine ourselves in a position or a role, a job, if we've not seen somebody else like us in that role. Like it's not impossible, but it's harder. And as we all make decisions as we're growing up about the kind of things that are for people like us. And so it's really important that everybody feels like they have the option for a career or a role in STEM, because STEM is one of those areas, it's building the world and it's shaping the world we live in. And if we don't have diverse representation of people in STEM, then that world will be shaped based on a very limited point of view. And then it's just a bit of a perpetuating cycle, because then people look at those role models and think, oh, that's not for people like me. So the more diverse role models that we have in STEM, the more young people following them will be able to see, oh yeah, it is for people like me. It doesn't mean that if you can't find a role model, it's not for you. It's just that it can be harder. It can be harder to even come into your head in the first place, if you've not come across somebody who could be an inspiration or a role model. So I think diverse representation in the first place is the most important thing, that STEM should be for everybody and constructed by everybody. Because like if you think about algorithms and computers, there's some really so like if you're programming a computer to make decisions, the person who does that algorithm writing and that programming is going to be inputting their priorities and their worldview, and it's not necessarily taking into account it's not that they're ignoring other worldviews, but they just haven't got that on their radar. So last summer we had the problem with the exams algorithm. That comes about when people aren't thinking about other people's experiences. And so the exams algorithm was really, really flawed because it essentially discriminated against children from more disadvantaged backgrounds. And that's probably because the people creating the algorithm just didn't have that in their worldview. And so it's really, really important that if STEM is creating the world, we need to have everybody involved in that creation.
Absolutely. And I like that analogy of the algorithms and programming to be used to really represent that. And I can relate to the first point you said. So I myself studied chemical engineering at University of Birmingham, and one of our guests studied bioengineering at University of Sheffield, but we've now both gone into teaching. And I remember on an industrial visit, there was no one who really looks like me who was present in that industrial plant site. And it was harder to imagine myself doing that 5 days a week and 8 hours a day. So I guess that brings me on to the next question about how some people do still pursue STEM subjects at degree level, but don't necessarily pursue that further into a career. But also when you look at more senior roles, that representation decreases. So what do you think the barriers are, not necessarily for pursuing STEM academically, but pursuing STEM as a career or progressing onto more senior roles, if you just briefly tell us?
So I guess I'm a bit like you. So I came from a free school meal background, and went on to do microbiology at university. But again, like I felt like I was maybe a bit of a like I didn't quite fit at university, and I ended up not pursuing STEM, but pursuing like education and STEM, like science communication. I think some of it is to do with that identity building, and the more role models we have, And the more input we have into that, the more people will see it as like for people like me, and that they're not like not having imposter syndrome or whatever. Because looking back on it now, I just think, oh, that's so silly. And then I think there's also stuff to do with support in terms of getting people into the workplace, doing work placement, so they actually get to practically get involved. One of the things we do with the Crest Awards, especially at the higher levels, is we encourage people to have mentors, so that they have someone who's in role, kind of encouraging them, looking at their work, or maybe they do like an industry placement. I think those are really powerful for giving people a sense of ownership and like they can carry on. And then there's a whole load of stuff around women in STEM and having workplaces that are friendly towards women, and family friendly policies and all kinds of stuff like that as well, which is a bit of a can of worms to open. There are things that need to change, but I think they are changing gradually.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That's brilliant. So I guess when it comes to really tackling those stereotypes that you mentioned, it probably needs to start early on in a young person's life when they are in high
Yeah.
school. And teachers and schools do have initiatives in place to help showcase STEM careers, get them in touch with STEM mentors, like you mentioned, or just to really change the perception of STEM for young people. So, what advice and support can the British Science Association give to teachers and schools? If you just tell us in a minute.
Okay, so there's a whole lot of stuff. I would say start with the British Science Week website. We've got a Smashing Stereotypes campaign, so there's loads of really good role models there. And then I would also say go to the Crest Awards website, and there's resources and stuff for doing projects. There's nothing better than a young person doing a project for themselves and thinking, yeah, I can do this because I just did it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Maria. Listeners, you've been listening to Maria, the Head of Education at British Science Association. Maria, thank you for giving us your time and just really getting us excited about the British Science Weekend.
That's brilliant. It's been a pleasure.
Shireen, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Jawairiya. Thank you for having me.
I guess I want to start off with a discussion that you and I have had quite regularly. We both went to the University of Birmingham, so we both went to a Russell Group uni. And I think what we often did was compare our courses to non-Russell Group unis such as Aston. And I guess we kind of compared how much work are we putting in? Do we still have to get that same level of qualification but more work? And I guess the question is, what are your views on regarding whether a young person should go to a Russell Group uni or not? Because I think for some it is the be all and end all.
And that's a really good question. I don't think it's essential to go to a Russell Group university. I chose to go because I like the structure of the course at University of Birmingham. I also really enjoy the city from the few times I'd visited. And I think that's a lot more important than going just for the sake of a name or for the sake of the fact that they are within the top 20 of the league tables of universities. Also, an important thing would be to look online at the sort of modules that the university teaches, whether it's mainly classroom-based teaching, whether it's lab-based teaching, things like that, that are really going to mold your experience at university, and not just whether it's Russell Group University.
You've touched on some really great points there about what factors to consider when you are applying for universities. And it's not just about league tables, it's not just about that academic aspect. It is about the social aspect as well, the city, the life outside of your academic studies, whether you're actually going to enjoy your 3 or 4 years there. So brilliant. You've now secured yourself a really great job at AstraZeneca. Do you think whether the fact that you went to a Russell Group uni played a role in that or not so much?
I don't think it did, actually. I work with a lot of people within my position that didn't go to a Russell Group university, so I think that proves that it's not an essential to have to go to a top university to get the job that I did. I think what's more important is that you portray that you have a passion for what you're applying for in your interviews, and that is above that comes above going to a top university or having an advanced degree or a master's or a PhD. I think it's that passion that you portray in an interview.
You mentioned something really interesting there. You said it's more about how you portray yourself during an interview compared to rather than the qualifications you have. So what tips would you give to someone that would help them to stand out of the application and interview process?
I think what's really important is don't just rely on your degree carrying you through the interview process. They know that most of the people that they're interviewing would have a degree from a good university, so they meet those criteria. What you want to show is that you have extra, you have things that other people that they're interviewing don't have. And one way that you can do that is showing that you've put in additional research. So, you've researched about what the job would include on a day-to-day basis, the different routes that that job could take you in, which shows that you're not just thinking about, that job for yourself now, but you're thinking about potentially molding a career within that company, which is what they really look for. They want to see someone that has passion, that has drive, because everybody that they're interviewing will have a degree. You just have to stand out in that way.
Brilliant. Biomedical science isn't generally a degree that lacks representation of women or people from BAME backgrounds. You're now working for AstraZeneca, which is a big pharmaceutical company. What's the representation like there?
So the representation within my role, which is quite an entry-level role at the company, it's actually very well represented with people from BAME backgrounds and between males and females. However, what I have noticed, through working at the company, is that there are mainly men in the more executive roles, that there isn't as much of a representation of women in the jobs that are much higher up in the company.
That's really interesting to hear. What do you think the barriers to that are? So as you go on to more senior positions, why do you think there are fewer females or fewer people from BAME backgrounds?
I think the reasons differ. For example, there may be barriers to women going for those executive roles because of, the role that women play usually within a family. So most women may not go for an executive role within a company because those executive roles usually require you to work, extended hours, evenings, sometimes potentially working on the weekends in order to secure those executive positions. And a lot of women feel that they are unable to, put the extra hours in if they're having to support their family, raise their children and doing things like that. I think that's one barrier. And I think maybe companies could work on, helping women that have families to gain access to these more executive roles. I think the reason that potentially we don't have as many people from BAME backgrounds in executive roles could stem from reasons from even before university, and we're looking at maybe from more of a class perspective. So I truly believe that maybe it's because the people that I work with and the people that I've been exposed to in executive positions have usually had a very fortunate upbringing and a very good education system. I've noticed that those people have usually gone to private schools, they've had extra tuition, and they've often grown up having their education, then extracurricular activities, doing a lot of additional things. Whereas I think a lot of people from BAME backgrounds haven't had that, haven't been able to have that due to the class system. And yeah, I think that's been a significant barrier. It's not necessarily something that we see at university level. I think it starts from much before that, and I think it would stem from a class issue.
You're absolutely right, and that was brilliant. And I love that you said it doesn't necessarily begin at university. In regards to the class system, it goes way before that. And I think university, and I'm sure you can agree on this, when we were at university, we went to University of Birmingham, and I think that was the first time where we really noticed that difference between those who went to private schools and came from more well-off backgrounds compared to those that didn't. And I think what really took me by surprise was how some people were able to tackle such academically challenging degrees, but at the same time taking part in wider life of uni, so taking part in sports, in music, having a job, having a social life. And I guess the question was, how are they balancing this? But if you think about it, those that came from private school backgrounds, they learned to balance the time at a much earlier age compared to those that didn't. So I guess that played a role, and I guess that kind of affects someone's life chances. Biomedical science is a popular degree, which I guess would make the job market quite competitive. What was your experience like post-uni when it came to looking for a graduate job?
I'm not going to lie, it wasn't easy to look for a job when I graduated, which was quite disappointing. we were taught at university that we were getting a very good degree from a Russell Group university, and I really believed that that would put me sort of at the top of the list, in application processes. However, I quickly learnt that that wasn't the case. It does not just stem from the degree that you do and where you study, which builds upon the point I made earlier about, how you portray yourself in interviews. And a lot of companies I noticed that another barrier was that a lot of companies were advertising entry level roles. However, when I, progressed through some interview processes, I realized that actually the people that they were employing were people that had some experience. So then that just completely went against what they were looking for from the onset, which was someone that didn't have experience. And I think a huge issue that some of my friends have faced is that there are just not enough jobs and too many people are going for the few jobs that there are. So you find yourself competing with people that actually have experience for roles that don't require experience. And from an employer's perspective, they will naturally take someone that has some experience because for them it's much easier, less training for them to do for that new person. So from that perspective, I did find it really, really difficult.
Brilliant.
However, I would say that one key thing that you should do is apply instantly whenever you see a job advertised. A lot of companies will probably fill that position within a few days. I was applying for some roles that had, 100 or 200 applications within a few days, and these are really, really big companies. Again, that's where you could potentially change your approach. I'm working currently for a very big pharmaceutical company. However, that role was introduced to me via sort of a recruitment agency. So that's another route that you could take. Recruitment agencies are really good to go down. There are some recruitment agencies that tailor specifically to get graduates into roles. They work specifically with graduates. They help you with your application process. They really sell you to the employer. And some employers do look for, fresh graduates that they can train and mold for their company at that stage.
Brilliant. You've given some really good tips and advice there. And then what I like is the first point you made. You at university, you're in this bubble thinking that you're going to land yourself a job straight away, straight after uni, just because you go to a Russell Group university. And I guess that's the misconception in relation to the first point we made about, is it worth going to a Russell Group uni? And in fact, it doesn't really make that much of a difference when it comes to applying for jobs. Can you briefly tell us, you've already touched upon the different routes that someone can take in terms of securing a graduate job. So you mentioned recruitment agencies, for example. But I guess with biomedical science, people often think it's more research-based jobs. You took a different route with your current role at AstraZeneca. So can you briefly tell us about the different fields that biomedical science can take you?
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot of fields that you could experience and do with a biomedical science degree. One of the key ones that most people think, like you said, is lab-based roles. Another one could be, for the pharmaceutical industry, like I'm doing. I know people that currently work within the finance industry, within banking. So there's a lot of different things that you can do, and that's mainly because employers see that a biomedical science degree is a highly technical degree, and due to that, there are certain skills that you will learn as part of your biomedical science degree that are transferable across so many different fields. One thing I would say though is from experience that my friends have had, if you want to pursue a sort of lab-based career within the NHS after your biomedical science degree, it's really important that you ensure that your degree is accredited by the NHS. And this is something that I didn't know before going to university. But what that accreditation means is that, the NHS has worked with the university to sort of approve those modules within the degree, which means that when that person graduates, they're not only just, a graduate from the university, but they're also trained within the modules that the NHS requires you to do that role. So what that would mean is that you don't have to start a completely entry-level position because you already have that accredited degree. You can start at a slightly higher position with higher pay, and it still only took 3 years. But again, University of Birmingham, which is a Russell Group university, is not accredited, whereas Aston University, which is not a Russell Group uni, is actually accredited as far as I know.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Shireen, you've been absolutely brilliant and you've given a really great insight into biomedical science. Thank you for joining us. Listeners, that brings us to the end of the first half of the show of this second episode in our STEM special in the lead up to British Science Week. The previous show had guests talk about routes other than university to get into STEM careers, where we heard from Abbas Zamir and Angelina Aziz. This show has been focusing on celebrating women in STEM. We've already heard from Maria Rozzini, Head of Education at British Science Association, and Shireen Amjad, a clinical study administrator at AstraZeneca and biomedical science graduate student from the University of Birmingham. We're heading off to a break now, but please do stay tuned in for the second half, where we're going to be hearing from Tasmia Asif, bioengineering graduate from the University of Sheffield and current maths teacher at Denby High School. We're also going to be hearing from Ruqayya Ahmed, a second-year Maths with Finance and Economics undergraduate student at City University, London. Assalamu alaikum listeners, welcome back to the feature show. I'm your host, Jawairiya Tanveer, and we're joined in this half of the show firstly with Tasmia Asif, who is a bioengineering graduate from the University of Sheffield and current maths teacher at Denby High School. We're then going to be hearing from Ruqayya Ahmed, who is currently in her second year of studying maths with economics and finance at City University, London, and will be telling us about her experience of combining STEM with the finance and economic sector. Tasmia, welcome to the show and thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Very lovely to hear from you. So you're currently a maths teacher at Denby, and I'm sure there's plenty of people listening who know you as Miss Asif, but they may not be quite familiar with your background prior to going into teaching. So you studied bioengineering at University of Sheffield, which is quite a unique type of engineering. So tell us a bit about what bioengineering actually involves and where it can lead to.
Okay. Yeah, actually it is quite unique and not many people know about it. And to be fair, I didn't really know what it was before, when I first came across it. But bioengineering is a field that combines engineering and medicine. I feel like that's such a cliche response, but for example, it involves like preventing invasive surgery. It can involve innovating high-tech health devices. And I think the obvious one that people associate bioengineering is enhancing artificial organs or prosthetics. And yeah.
Definitely sounds very kind of futuristic and just kind of preparing ahead. Very interesting. So this show and the previous show are STEM specials in the lead up to British Science Week, which commences on the 5th of March. And one of their aims is to really highlight the representation of women and people from BAME backgrounds. And I've mentioned in the previous show that I was the only British female Muslim in my cohort of chemical engineering, but I found it quite surprising because it's Birmingham and you study at Sheffield, which is quite similar to Birmingham in terms of that diversity. But what was your experience like as a British female Muslim studying bioengineering in Sheffield?
Oh my God, you were the only one in your course. That's crazy. Yeah, I think people assume just because the city or town is diverse that the student body would then also be diverse. But that's like not the case, because obviously universities they have students from all over the world. And for example, in my experience, I was the one of two Muslims on my course. I think I was the only one of two Asians as well on the course. I remember starting off and feeling really aware of the fact that I am one of two Muslims on the course, and sometimes I felt like it was really, really obvious, like really painfully obvious. I think I definitely felt alienated, or that I even alienated people. And it was such a weird experience for me, because obviously I grew up in Luton, which is like renowned for being a very multicultural and diverse town. And I was never made to feel like conscious of like my skin color or my religion. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the non-BME people that I was surrounded by had that exposure to other backgrounds, and they were very accepting of it. Whereas when I went to university, that wasn't the case. I'm sure no one ever meant it intentionally either. And no one ever said anything mean or was explicitly rude or disrespectful. Like, they were actually really lovely people, and they were really friendly. But I guess just the sad reality is that they just had no exposure to people of color or Muslims. When I say they were more friendly to each other, not necessarily to me, but they were never mean. I think then, like, it did really like get me down in the first like few months, I guess. But I try to see it from like a better perspective, that, like, you know, I can use that as an opportunity to then represent Islam in the best way that I can. Because, you know, for some of these people, this is the first time that they've seen a Muslim, let alone interacted with one. And I really try to like take that responsibility really seriously, and I think that helped me kind of combat the issue, or like help me feel better about the situation. Yeah,
that's brilliant. That's brilliant. It's really, really nice to hear such an honest, realistic insight from yourself. And you're absolutely right. People assume just because a city or town is diverse, the student body, they might think, yeah, that's going to be diverse as well. But no, that's not the case. And I love that you took that as an opportunity to just really be proud of your identity and use that as a chance to just showcase your identity, because they may not have had that exposure before. And it can be quite off-putting to lots of students who are interested in pursuing it as a degree, but also as a career. And I remember I went on an industrial visit and I saw old white men, and it was a bit off-putting because I thought, do I see myself working here 5 days a week, 8 hours a day? And I thought, no, I don't. So it can be quite off-putting. So why do you think females or people from BAME backgrounds aren't necessarily attracted to engineering? Is it purely down to lack of academic interest, or is it more to do with lack of desire to pursue it as a career?
That's a really good question. I think even lack of academic interest, it stems from we as a society don't tend to not like encourage women to pursue those subjects or those careers. And I think another thing is that just the work-family balance, or kind of like lack of advancement opportunities, can be quite off-putting for women, where they feel like, oh, you know, how am I going to, you know, manage a family with this career? And I think another big thing is that just the social bias affects a woman's progress, or like her career choices as well, which links to my first point too. And then finally, I think the biggest thing, and I think you and I can both relate to this as well, is just the lack of role models, which is such like, if that puts you off, it would just be such a vicious cycle, because then you won't like pursue those careers, and then, you know, people after you won't pursue those careers because they don't have role models. So yeah, it is really hard. But I think like going forward, if colleges, universities, and like workplaces in STEM implemented the changes necessary to like accommodate women and make them feel more supported and comfortable, and provide like a positive environment for them to focus on their skills, without the pressure that men don't have, we will not only like see more women in STEM, but also be able to combat the surplus of unfilled STEM positions, in my opinion, that is.
You're absolutely right, and I can relate to a lot of what you said. Firstly, the point about the work-life balance. As a female, I think it is a huge factor that you have to think about. But also in terms of progression, I knew I wanted to progress in my career, and I did not see myself progressing in chemical engineering because I didn't think I wanted to take on those additional responsibilities and challenges. So that kind of brings me on to my next question about you and I being quite similar in the sense that we both studied engineering but have now gone into teaching. For you, was there a particular point during your degree or before or after your degree where you came to that realization that you don't want to go into engineering?
Yeah, I get this a lot, and even my students, they would ask me, "Oh, Miss, why did you like become a teacher and not like go into engineering? You could have been earning so much more." And that's actually it is true, but I just feel like I wouldn't have been happy,
Completely
and
agree.
that happiness is just invaluable. And I think the point that I realized it was in my final year, when everyone was applying for their graduate schemes, and I just couldn't find the motivation to apply for one. And
Yeah.
just what everyone else was doing. It just didn't feel right. Like I just didn't feel like my skill set and my passions and my aspirations were like suited to the engineering field. Not that there's anything wrong with the engineering field. I just didn't think it was something that would bring out the best in me and my skill set. And I just felt like the big part of me wouldn't be utilized if I was an engineer. I did consider other fields and I kept thinking, oh, teaching is just a backup. I can just go to that, like, as a backup. And I hear that so much.
Mm.
But one day I was just like, I just asked myself, why not? Like, if I know I really enjoy working with kids and I actually have the basic skill set for it too, why not? I think I was really scared of the commitment, and I didn't know if I wanted to be be a teacher for the rest of my life, and it felt really overwhelming. But I decided, okay, it's fine. Let me just get a PGC under my belt, and there's no harm in that. I might not do teaching forever, and that's okay. And it's okay if I leave immediately if I feel like it's not right for me. But at least I have that qualification under my and the option to teach. And now 3 years on, I can't see myself leaving the field because I actually feel like this is like I'm in my element and this is my purpose. So I'm really like grateful that I made that decision.
That's really heartening to hear, and I can definitely hear your passion, and I'm sure the listeners can as well. You touched on a really interesting point there. You said you didn't think engineering would bring out the right skill set from you. And I think that's a really important point. When you're going for jobs, it's not just about are you a right fit for the role, but is that company, is that role a right fit for you and your personality, your morals, and your skill set, etc. So that's a really, really interesting point that you touched upon. And you touched upon something else quite nice as well, actually. You didn't know if you wanted to do teaching for the rest of your life when you were initially considering it, but it's okay because do what you want to do right now. And if you change your mind in a few years, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So
Yeah.
thank you. I really enjoyed listening to that. And I guess my next question would be people often hear, and I'm sure you and I hear this quite a bit. What was the point of studying engineering if you're not actually using your degree, but actually you gain a lot of transferable skills? So, have you used any of the skills gained from your degree in a classroom or in your role as a teacher?
Oh, 100%, 100% of the time, even. They are mainly, like, majority of them are like soft skills that are transferable, like, teamwork and leadership, which has like allowed me to work collaboratively in the department, for example, but also in a classroom setting, like, for example, identifying a student's strengths and weaknesses and helping it, using them to like help them grow. Creative thinking, resolving conflict, time management, being able to work under pressure. I literally could go on forever. And teachers have deadlines too, and I think there are literally a gazillion tasks. Thanks for reminding me. And my to-do list is always endless. So like knowing what to prioritize helps me to keep to those deadlines too.
Okay, brilliant.
I think a big one is confidence and public speaking, and doing presentations and stuff, because obviously that's what a lesson is all about. In terms of knowledge, I think that my degree has really brushed up on my knowledge in not just maths but also science subjects. So I'm able to actually extend students in those subjects. For example, my form students can ask me for help regarding science, and I would know how to deepen their learning. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And I think another really interesting point is something you touched upon earlier about role models and that not always being visible. And I guess as a teacher, you being a bioengineering graduate, me being a chemical engineering graduate, we are those role models for the students to show that you can actually go into that field, whether it's just to gain a degree out of it or whether it's to pursue it further. Tasmia, you've been absolutely brilliant. It's been a joy having you on. Thank
Thank
you for
so
joining
much.
us.
You've been such a brilliant host. Thank you.
Rakaya, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Okay, great. So let's begin with discussing your degree. You're studying maths with economics and finance, which is quite a unique degree in nature as it combines STEM with the finance sector. But you also did A-levels in chemistry, maths, and business. So I guess you were always quite keen on combining STEM with other fields and subjects. So what led you to pursue a degree which combines STEM with the finance and economic sector?
Well, with my degree, I felt like that I needed something that helped me to broaden my career opportunities. So I could go into different sectors. So with economics, I could go into that sector or finance. But with maths, is quite an adaptable degree. So I could go into any job because maths is required in different fields as well. So I felt with this degree, it just made me have more opportunities than other people who did like straight maths.
Great. I guess one of the common challenges with the STEM sector and the finance sector is in regards to that underrepresentation of women. What is the male to female ratio in your course like? I mean, your degree is essentially split into 3 different parts. Is there a particular area or module where you notice it among the others, or is it a common theme?
Well, I didn't really notice that there was more men than women in my course until I looked around, and that's something that then I noticed. It wasn't something that just came out like I saw it straight from the get go. But I felt like with my degree, it was more with economics and finance that there was more men than women. Maybe it's because that's men have more interest in that kind of sector than women, and maths isn't something that is promoted to a lot of females, and a lot of females don't really want to go into that kind of sector, I feel like. But you won't really notice it unless like you're alone, because I had like my friends with me. So I didn't feel like, oh, I was the only woman there.
Great. You mentioned you don't think a lot of females are attracted to going into maths. Do you think there's a particular reason for that?
It's a very demanding field to go into, in terms of taking over your life with the balance of work and your home life. A lot of women don't want work like imagining with your home life as well. So I felt like with my degree and what kind of careers you could go into, people don't want it to be overwhelming or something that takes up too much of their time.
You've mentioned that maths is quite demanding in nature, and I guess it's one of those subjects that students often find challenging at GCSE level, and I guess it is one of those subjects that students either love or hate. I remember when I was in high school studying maths, I wasn't that great at it initially, but I did enjoy it, but I struggled initially to achieve those grades, and it was about changing up my practice, doing more practice, doing more past papers, and just kind of finding effective ways of revising. So you can still enjoy maths, but not always achieve those high academic grades. Was your experience with maths always quite positive, or did you also have challenges when you were in high school or college?
In high school, it was relatively easy, I guess, because with maths, I know that unlike, say, for English, it is more practice based. So the more you practice, the better you get at it, which a lot of people don't want to do because it does require you to do a lot of questions. And if you do get a question wrong, it is demotivating. So people don't really want to do that. But so I found in my GCSEs that I did quite well in my GCSEs because I found the concept of once you know the method, the practice is quite easy. With A levels, it's a bit different because you need to know the theory as well and the reasoning behind it, and it's a bit more detailed. So I felt like with A levels, it's a lot harder than GCSEs, which people don't really understand until they actually do it.
You've mentioned that practice is a huge element in achieving high grades in maths, and it is about getting the right answer, but finding the method or the different methods to achieve that right answer. And he also touched on something quite interesting, that at A level it does become more demanding, because you kind of have to know more about the derivations and theory behind the maths. And I guess at university level, it's even more academically demanding. So what tips would you give to a student in year 10 and 11 wanting to develop their math skills?
I feel like you need to look at different aspects of how to revise. There's not one set way to revise. What you can do is look at YouTube videos to actually go through it. A lot of people are more visual learners and looking at a textbook. What I've done is I made an Instagram page where I go through maths questions for A levels. And I felt like because a lot of kids at that age do use social media, it is a good way for them to actually use it in a good way, especially for the education, and it's quite convenient for them. With A levels and GCSEs, there is so many resources out there. It just you need to find out which one's right for you. With maths, that's the good thing about it. There's a lot of things that you could like for a question. There's a lot of ways to get to the same solution. So I feel like there's what's the word? You don't need to stress about, oh, I didn't understand this, but there's another method for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, brilliant. You're absolutely right. There's not always one method to use to get to the final answer. There are different methods. And if you don't like one method, if you don't understand one method, there are other methods that you can use. And absolutely, there are a lot of resources out there online. And you've mentioned your Instagram page. And I really like the point you mentioned about social media. Students do use social media a lot nowadays, Instagram, TikTok, etc. And so if you can use that in a way to benefit your studies, it's brilliant. Great. Working in the education sector myself and having taught GCSE maths, one of the questions or comments that students often ask is, when are we going to use maths? What is the point of maths? And I guess rightly so, because you don't really want to be learning something if you don't see the use of doing so. So it is important for those links to be developed with the real world. You're in a good position because your degree actually relates maths to sectors other than STEM, with you doing a degree in maths with finance and economics. So tell us a little bit about how maths can apply to different sectors, different fields of life and work.
With maths, like when you actually apply it to a real life situation, is more about analyzing the information. So a lot of people get confused because of math because there's so many numbers there. But once you understand the meaning of those numbers, it's a lot easier. So for like economics or finance or even like statistics, once you understand it, you can incorporate into different stuff. So say if I had a question about I don't know, a gradient, if I knew what a gradient meant and the number, I could apply that into different situations by like saying, oh, this is how steep the slope is. So I felt like with maths, there isn't something that it is not something that you need to know the numbers about. You just need to understand what they mean. So like with career wise, it's more about analyzing than actually doing the mathematics or the equations and the formulas.
Brilliant. So you're now in your second year at City London, and I guess you are at that point now where you have to start thinking about life post uni. And it is a tough time. I remember when I was in my second year, a lot of people were applying for summer or year placements in industry. And it's not always an easy time during university. So looking ahead, what are the plans for you after university? You mentioned earlier that one of your attractions towards your degree was it can lead you into a variety of fields. Do you have a particular idea of fields that you want to enter?
So when I was in GCSEs and A levels, my career path changed so many times. When I started a university, I had in mind teaching, but at the moment, that's not what I want to go into anymore. So I feel like people who look into what university want to go to, what degree want to go into, they should have in mind that that's the career path they want to go into, because your careers actually changes so many times you don't realize. So I actually don't know what I want to go into, but I know that with my degree, I'm not fussed because I know I can adapt it to so many different sectors, and there's so many opportunities out there that is not something that I'm deprived of, or like I have less job opportunities when in fact I have more job opportunities.
You're absolutely right about the point that you raised about your career aspirations changing as you grow up. And even after you graduate, it's not always straightforward about what you want to go into. And I guess one way to kind of figure out your career pathway is by getting that direct insight by taking a placement or an internship. And I appreciate in the given circumstances, it's quite hard. Have you found alternative ways to still kind of get an insight into different fields?
So because of Corona, everything's online. So there's a company, it's called Forage, who do online internships with like big companies. So, and the good thing about it is it goes with your own pace. So at the moment, I'm doing an internship with PwC for assurance. So I could do the work whenever I have the time to do that. So it's based on my availability, not their availability, which I think is quite good with someone who is at uni and doing a part-time job. So I could juggle my time and do it when it's more convenient for me.
Brilliant. Bright Network, I know, is another company that offered online internships in the first lockdown that we had last year. And I think they are still giving out internship opportunities. And, you know, you mentioned PwC, there are some really good big companies in a range of fields. So there is still a way to gain that insight if it's not in person. Brilliant. Rakaya, thank you so much for joining us on the Future Show. You've been great, and it's been great to hear about your degree combining STEM with the finance and economic sector.
And thank you for having me. It was nice talking about women in STEM.
Listeners, that brings us to the end of the show of our second episode in our STEM special. We've had brilliant guests. We first heard from Maria Rozzini, the Head of Education at British Science Association. We then heard from Shireen Amjad, Clinical Study Administrator at AstraZeneca. After the break, we heard from Tasmia Asif, Bioengineering graduate and current maths teacher at Denby High School. We then finished up with hearing from Ruqayya Ahmed, a maths with finance and economics undergraduate student.